Almost nobody discussing weight after 60 talks about the room where that weight is stored. Rest 2 fingers just above your belt for a moment. Behind that spot, fat can gather around organs without announcing itself on a bathroom scale. It has its own blood supply. It has its own chemical signals. It has its own relationship with stress. It also has one feature that makes ordinary weight tracking miss the real change. Picture a scale above 2 closed storage rooms. The needle can stay still while one room gets crowded. Today I will show you 4 conditions that help explain that near miss. Cortisol is the stress hormone at the center of this story, but it is neither a cartoon villain nor a complete answer. It helps the body respond to demand. Trouble begins when repeated stress signaling meets tissue that can regenerate cortisol locally, altered fat distribution, and a dashboard that reports only total mass. The scale records bulk. Your body chooses a storage room. That gap can make sincere effort look useless, even when the change you care about was never being measured. By the end, you will have a 4-part map for separating the signal, the storage site, the evidence, and the sensible next move. The evidence is mixed, and saying that early is a strength. We have human observational work, small mechanistic human experiments, reviews, and 2 randomized stress reduction programs. They do not all answer the same question. They do not prove that stress alone puts fat around your organs. Together, they show something more precise. Long-term cortisol exposure tracks with waist growth. Severe cortisol excess changes where fat sits. Local fat tissue can handle cortisol differently. Stress programs can move an abdominal distribution measure without moving BMI, although one trial missed its main group comparison. The papers point toward influence, not destiny. The dashboard comes first. Most people meet body change through a weight reading, a BMI number, or a tighter waistband. Those are related signals, but they are not interchangeable. BMI combines weight and height. Waist circumference tells you something about the middle. Imaging can separate visceral fat around the organs from subcutaneous fat beneath the skin. So we will walk from the daily stress signal to the tissue, from the tissue to the waist, and from the waist to the clinical picture. The walk is long because the mechanism lives between those readings. That is also where useful choices begin. The first signal. A stressful moment is not evidence of disease. Cortisol rises as part of a normal response to demand, and one difficult morning does not settle where fat will be stored. The useful distinction is repetition. A single alarm is a sound. A pattern of alarms becomes an environment. You can check this distinction in your own life without diagnosing yourself. Notice whether pressure arrives as a rare event or seems to color sleep, meals, movement, and recovery for long stretches. That observation is not a cortisol test. It simply tells you whether the first storage room door deserves a closer look. A 2014 human review described chronic stress mainly through dysregulation of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis as promoting visceral fat accumulation. That axis is the communication route linking brain, pituitary gland, adrenal glands, and the stress response. The review also described a return signal. Obesity can promote low-grade inflammation through increased release of adipokines, which are signals made by fat tissue. What that means practically is simple. Stress biology can affect the fat compartment, and the fat compartment can answer back. The dashboard shows weight. The signaling system does not. That is the first closed door in our picture. An outside signal reaches a tissue that is already sending signals of its own. This is why blaming willpower is such a poor explanation. A person can follow the same eating plan with the same care while living inside a different stress pattern. The mechanism does not excuse every habit, but it explains why identical effort need not produce identical storage. Your character is not the missing variable. Biology is. Hold that thought, because the most surprising part arrives when cortisol is made inside the storage room itself. First, we need to see what long exposure leaves behind. The hair archive. Blood and saliva can capture cortisol around a moment. The facts in this episode add a longer view through scalp hair. Hair grows while exposure accumulates, so researchers can use it as a record of longer-term cortisol and cortisone. That does not turn a hair sample into a verdict about one person's belly. It gives a study a different window from a single blood draw. The difference matters. A dashboard reading taken now can miss the history that helped shape the current compartment. The scale reports today. The archive carries a longer signal. The next result shows how wide that gap can become. In a 3-year human observational study of 1,604 participants, higher hair cortisol and cortisone were associated with higher BMI and waist circumference. The reported waist associations were 5.36 centimeters for cortisol and 8.54 centimeters for cortisone, with all those current associations at p below 0.001. Over time, higher hair cortisol was associated with a 0.58% yearly BMI increase, while higher hair cortisone was associated with a 0.84% yearly waist increase. The authors were explicit that causality still had to be proven. Tracking is not the same as causing. It is still a meaningful track. Imagine two older adults whose scales show the same change over a year. One sees little movement at the waist. The other needs a looser belt. That pair is illustrative, not clinical evidence. It shows why a single number can conceal two different body stories. The study does not tell us that cortisol caused either story. It tells us that longer-term cortisol markers traveled with the readings we care about. The needle reports mass. The waist reports location more clearly. That is our first release from the old frustration. If your scale and waist disagree, the disagreement contains information. It does not prove you failed. The audience tax. After 60, people are often told to watch the scale with increasing seriousness. That advice can make every stable week feel like a verdict. But the study we just covered followed both BMI and waist, and those measures did not carry identical long-term signals. Hair cortisol tracked yearly BMI change. Hair cortisone tracked yearly waist change. Those are associations, not instructions. Still, they expose the tax hidden inside scale-only thinking. You can be attentive to the wrong dashboard. You can also mistake a change in one compartment for no change at all. The reading is real. Its field of view is narrow. There is another restraint worth stating. Waist circumference does not directly image visceral fat. It is a practical body measure, not an MRI view of the organ compartment. So the waist can raise a useful question without answering every part of it. This distinction protects you from both extremes. You do not dismiss a changing waist because weight looks steady. You also do not label every larger waist as a cortisol problem. The storage rooms are still closed to direct view. We need stronger spatial evidence. That evidence comes from a rare state of genuine chronic cortisol excess, and it changes the picture sharply. The extreme model. Cushing's disease creates sustained cortisol excess. It is not ordinary life stress, and using it as though it were would be misleading. Its value here is different. It shows what the human body can look like when cortisol is truly high for a long time. A 2018 human review described Cushing's syndrome as a model of metabolic syndrome, including visceral obesity, abnormal blood lipids, high blood pressure, and diabetes. It explained that glucocorticoid excess acts across liver, muscle, fat tissue, and pancreas, increasing glucose production and impairing insulin sensitivity. Extreme exposure opens a window. It does not define everyone watching. That difference is essential. Ordinary chronic stress is not Cushing's disease. A tight waistband is not a diagnosis. The extreme model tells us that cortisol has the biological ability to alter distribution. It does not tell us that every difficult season produces the same effect. Precision keeps the useful insight and removes the scare. The dashboard might show weight. The condition changes body compartments. Now the promised image begins to sharpen. One storage room lies beneath the skin. The other lies around the organs. A single weight reading adds both together. The next study used whole-body MRI to look inside each room. 15 women with Cushing's disease and 12 healthy controls underwent whole-body MRI in a 2010 human observational study. The women with Cushing's had higher visceral to total fat ratios at p below 0.01, lower subcutaneous to total ratios at p below 0.05, more total visceral and trunk subcutaneous fat at p below 0.001. The study was small and observational, yet it gives us direct spatial evidence that chronic cortisol excess is linked with a different distribution, not merely a higher total. The rooms were measured. They were not equally full. This is the first major reversal. Visceral fat is concerning partly because it behaves as an active tissue. That same activity also makes its signaling visible to biology and research. Resistance does not mean invisibility. A storage room with active doors can respond when conditions change, even if a scale cannot tell you which door moved. I am refusing the tempting overstatement here. The MRI study does not prove that lowering everyday stress will remove visceral fat. It proves a narrower point. With genuine cortisol excess, where fat sits changes. The scale counts the whole house. The scan reveals the rooms. Two people can therefore weigh the same and carry different proportions inside those rooms. They can also lose the same amount while changing those proportions differently. Again, that is an explanatory pair, not proof about two actual patients. Its job is to correct the picture in your head. Total mass is the roofline. Distribution is the floor plan. Once that distinction is visible, many frustrating outcomes stop looking mysterious. The person did not necessarily break the plan. The plan may have watched only the roof. We have now completed the outside signal and the spatial result. Three hidden mechanisms still determine what the dashboard cannot show. That is the first act of the storage story. The signal can persist, the waste can track it, and severe excess can redistribute fat. But three unknowns remain. Where is cortisol being handled? Which measurement window catches it? What changed in the randomized programs when BMI did not? Those answers belong to the tissue, the timescale, and the intervention. The dashboard counts the load, while the body chooses the storage room. No ordinary bad day answers all three. No dramatic hormone headline replaces them. The next door opens inside abdominal fat itself. The local workshop. Cortisol circulating through blood is only part of the picture in the facts file. Human abdominal fat can convert cortisone into cortisol within the tissue. An enzyme called 11-beta-hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase type 1 helps make that conversion. Think of circulating cortisol as deliveries arriving at a building. Local regeneration is a workshop inside the building, making more of the same signal. A normal-looking delivery count does not prove the workshop is quiet. That is why a single blood reading cannot settle every question about tissue exposure. The dashboard records traffic. The room may be working locally. A 2005 small human experiment compared 6 lean and 6 obese men with a randomized placebo-controlled crossover of carbinoxolone in the obese group. Whole-body cortisol regeneration did not differ, but conversion of cortisone to cortisol was faster in abdominal subcutaneous fat from the obese men. During insulin infusion, tissue enzyme activity fell markedly in lean men but not obese men. The experimental drug inhibited whole-body regeneration, yet it did not significantly inhibit the fat tissue enzyme and did not improve insulin sensitivity. What that means practically is that whole-body readings and local tissue behavior can separate. Carbinoxolone was an experimental probe in that study. It is prescription only, not a supplement, and not a treatment anyone should seek from this video. The failed shortcut actually strengthens the lesson. Blocking a whole-body measure did not guarantee the target tissue changed, and it did not improve insulin sensitivity in that experiment. The dashboard shifted in one place. The storage room did not follow. This is the physics behind the earlier feeling. The same local activity that complicates measurement makes the tissue a specific biological site. It is not a passive sac. It is a room with machinery. A human review from 2000 gave this split a name. It described abdominal obesity as involving hyperactivity of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, sometimes called functional hypercortisolism. The review proposed two mechanisms. One was central, involving altered ACTH pulses and stronger responses to stress signals. The other was peripheral, within liver and visceral fat, where cortisol production could be higher. ACTH is a pituitary signal that tells the adrenal glands to make cortisol. In plain language, the control room and the storage room may both contribute. One blood snapshot is too small a window. The reading says one thing. The active tissue says more. This does not make testing pointless. It makes test interpretation a clinical task rather than a social media shortcut. Hair, blood, waist, BMI, symptoms and imaging look through different windows. None should be promoted as a home diagnosis. The honest result is less thrilling than a magic test and more useful than a hormone panic. Cortisol can act centrally and locally. Distribution can change without a proportional BMI change. Severe excess provides a clear model, while ordinary stress requires more caution. We are now ready for the hardest node, the trial results people often oversell. The trial test. If cortisol influences distribution, a stress reduction program should make body measures improve. That sentence sounds obvious. It is also too broad. The intervention, duration, population, adherence, and chosen body measure all matter. Two randomized studies in the facts file measured abdominal outcomes. Both offer useful signals. Neither supports a promise that meditation melts visceral fat. The first was larger and digital. The second was smaller, longer, and missed its main comparison. Their restraint is part of the lesson. A program can move stress and an abdominal measure while leaving BMI unchanged. The scale may not register the room. In a 2023 human randomized controlled trial, 161 adults with overweight and moderate stress entered digital meditation plus healthy eating, active control, or waitlist groups for 8 weeks. The meditation arms showed lower perceived stress, with F equal to 15.19 and P below 0.001, and lower sagittal diameter, with F equal to 4.59 and P equal to 0.03. BMI and cravings did not differ between groups. Greater adherence traveled with larger reductions in stress, cravings, and adiposity. Sagittal diameter is a front-to-back measure of the abdomen. The body measure moved. BMI did not. That is not proof of visceral fat loss. Sagittal diameter is a distribution measure, not a direct MRI measurement of visceral tissue in this trial. The result is still surprising because the abdominal measure changed without a BMI difference. The scale counted the house. The tape-like measure caught a shift in its shape. 8 weeks is the studied program length, not a guaranteed deadline for your body. Digital meditation is not a substitute for medical care, and anyone whose stress practice worsens distress should discuss the experience with a qualified professional. This trial offers a direction. It does not offer a personal prescription. The second randomized study prevents us from turning one encouraging result into a slogan. In 2011, 47 women with overweight or obesity were randomized to a 4-month mindfulness intervention or a wait list. The groups did not differ over time in average cortisol awakening response, weight, or abdominal fat. Within the obese subgroup, treatment participants reduced the awakening response and maintained weight, while controls had stable awakening response and gained weight. Improvements in mindfulness, chronic stress, and the awakening response were associated with abdominal fat reductions. The authors called it proof of concept. The main comparison stayed missing. That mixed finding deserves respect. A subgroup association is weaker than a clear difference between randomized groups. The trial does not let us say the program reduced abdominal fat overall. It lets us say the pattern inside one subgroup supported further study. 4 months is what researchers tested, not a universal schedule. Mindfulness may be useful for some people, but it is not a replacement for assessment or treatment. If you manage a mental health condition or find the practice distressing, a qualified clinician is the right partner. The intervention has a duration. Your biology does not owe it a result. Now the myth can be stated fairly. The familiar claim says high cortisol causes belly fat, so lowering cortisol makes belly fat disappear. The first half contains a biological truth. Chronic stress and cortisol signaling can influence visceral accumulation. The second half leaps over tissue, distribution, measurement, and trial design. But the leap is where the promise breaks. In one randomized trial, an abdominal measure moved while BMI did not. In the other, the main groups did not differ on abdominal fat. 5 words settle it. Influence is not sole control. Hormones shape the conditions. They do not write the entire outcome. The bathroom scale is like a warehouse invoice that lists total inventory but leaves every shelf blank. It can be accurate and incomplete at the same time. BMI has the same limitation here. It is useful for broad size, but it does not directly identify visceral tissue or local cortisol handling. That is not an attack on medicine. It is a demand for the right tool and the right claim. The dashboard reports one thing. The body compartment can do another. A precise metric used outside its field becomes a blurry answer. Measure what the claim is about. The 4 conditions now converge. First comes exposure across time, not one tense afternoon. Second comes tissue handling, including local cortisol regeneration. Third comes distribution, the split between fat beneath the skin and fat around organs. Fourth comes response, which may appear in an abdominal measure without appearing in BMI. I call the opening image the 2-room scale. The needle reports the combined load, while the rooms trade space beneath it. That image is not biology by itself. It is a way to remember what the studies measured: time, tissue, distribution, response. Together they create a qualitatively different state. When I first read the randomized trials, I expected the BMI result to be the headline. It was not. The more interesting result was the disagreement between BMI and the abdominal measure, followed by the smaller study's failure to beat its control group overall. That changed how I read the question. I stopped asking whether meditation burns belly fat. I started asking which outcome moved, in whom, and under what design. That is a disclosure about my reading process, not clinical evidence. Papers corrected my expectation. They should be allowed to correct yours too. Precision can feel less exciting. It prevents expensive mistakes. Comment the word curious if any of these caught you off guard so far. I want to know whether it was the hair record, the MRI rooms, the local cortisol workshop, or the BMI mismatch. Those 4 ideas compress the mechanism without flattening it. Exposure leaves a longer trace. Tissue can regenerate a signal. Imaging reveals location. Trials can move one measure while another stays still. No single fact proves cortisol decides your waist. No single reading clears cortisol either. The dashboard gives a useful number. The condition requires a map. That distinction leads directly to the practical part. Before the map, one common scene needs clearing up. You mention a changing waist at an appointment, and the standard advice is to manage calories, move more, sleep well, and reduce stress. That advice is not bad faith. There is no hidden plot. It is a broad response, built for limited time and many possible causes. A 2018 review shows why the biology refuses to fit one slogan. Glucocorticoid excess can act across liver, muscle, fat, and pancreas while affecting glucose production and insulin sensitivity. One hormone reaches several systems. You are the person living with the trade-off between breadth and precision. The research has been available, and none of this is fringe. The real problem is shorthand. Saying cortisol causes belly fat collapses a network into a culprit. Saying stress has nothing to do with the waist ignores human observational, imaging, mechanistic, and intervention evidence. The calibrated middle is stronger. Cortisol can push storage toward the visceral compartment under some conditions, especially when exposure is sustained or excessive. It does not act alone, and it does not make an individual outcome inevitable. That statement leaves room for action without selling certainty. Now the protocol. Use the MAPS protocol. It has 4 parts, each tied to the evidence we actually have. M means map more than mass. A means audit the time window. P means practice only what the trial supports. S means seek context before treatment. This is not a fat loss prescription. It closes the gap between a trusted reading and the body state that reading may miss. The dashboard counts the load while the body chooses the storage room. Each part protects you from a different error. Together, they turn cortisol from a scary label into a testable conversation. M means map more than mass. Keep the scale if it helps, but do not ask it to report a storage location. The hair study measured both BMI and waist across 3 years. The MRI study separated visceral, subcutaneous, total fat, and skeletal muscle. Those methods answer different questions. Your practical move is to bring a consistent record of weight and waist pattern to a clinician, rather than treating either as a diagnosis. Consistency matters more than a dramatic single reading. If physical limitations make self-measurement difficult, ask a professional to help. The minimum effective map is the one your clinician can interpret. The failure case is scale-only success or scale-only despair. A stable number can hide a waist change. A falling number cannot tell you which tissue changed. A waist measurement adds context, but it still does not directly image visceral fat. So the adherence ladder is modest. At the ideal level, use consistent measurements and clinical interpretation. At the easier level, notice clothing fit and bring the pattern to your next appointment without assigning it a hormone cause. At the floor, stop using one weigh-in as a moral score. The scale records total mass. The map asks where change may be happening. A means audit the time window. A single stressful morning, a single blood draw, scalp hair, and a 3-year waist trend do not represent the same span. The observational study connected longer-term hair cortisol markers with current body measures and later growth. It did not establish cause. The local tissue experiment showed that whole-body cortisol regeneration can differ from abdominal fat handling. The practical move is to ask what a test reflects before treating its result as a full-body verdict. The 2-room scale fails when time is erased. A good question restores the missing clock. The failure case is collecting a test result without understanding its window. That can create false reassurance or needless alarm. Your ideal level is clinician-guided interpretation that connects symptoms, history, medicines, and the purpose of testing. The easier level is writing down the question you want the test to answer before you order or request anything. The floor is simpler. Do not use a consumer claim to diagnose local cortisol activity in abdominal fat. The 2005 experiment required controlled methods in 6 lean and 6 obese men. A home shortcut cannot inherit that study's meaning. The time window shapes the answer. P means practice only what the trial supports. The 2023 trial tested 8 weeks of digital meditation in adults with overweight and moderate stress. Stress and sagittal diameter decreased in the meditation arms, while BMI did not differ. That supports a structured stress reduction option as one part of care. It does not support a promise to melt visceral fat. If you choose a stress practice, judge it first by whether it is sustainable and helpful for stress. Do not demand that the bathroom scale validate it. Cortisol can affect the storage room. Stress care is not a guaranteed key. The failure case is turning 8 weeks into a countdown to a smaller waist. That number belongs to the trial design. It is not a deadline. The 4-month study is an equally important guardrail because its intervention did not beat the waitlist on average abdominal fat, weight, or cortisol awakening response. The ideal level is a structured practice discussed with the right professional when health conditions complicate the picture. The easier level is an accessible program you can follow without overclaiming its effect. The floor is refusing the miracle promise. The body measure may move, BMI may not. For late joiners, keep this sentence. Cortisol influences the room, but it does not own the house. Food intake, activity, sleep, medicines, illness, age, and other factors may matter, but this episode has not presented evidence about their individual effects, so I will not invent a ranking. The evidence here supports a narrower map of exposure, tissue handling, distribution, and response. That is enough to correct the myth. It is not enough to diagnose a person. Restraint is useful because every extra claim creates another chance to mistake a plausible story for a measured result. This means seek context before treatment. Genuine cortisol excess belongs in medical care. The Cushing's MRI study and the Cushing's review show why. Chronic glucocorticoid excess can involve more visceral fat, less muscle, impaired insulin sensitivity, and multiple metabolic problems. Those findings do not create a home checklist for Cushing's disease. They create a reason not to self-treat a suspected hormone disorder. Bring persistent concerns and changing body patterns to a clinician. Ask whether the distribution, history, medicines, and testing plan fit together. The minimum effective next step is a better clinical question, not a supplement. The concrete failure case is chasing a product that claims to block cortisol. Remember carbinoxolone. In the small experiment, it inhibited whole-body cortisol regeneration, but did not significantly inhibit the abdominal fat enzyme and did not improve insulin sensitivity. It was a prescription-only experimental probe, not a treatment recommendation. A product label cannot leap across those missing results. The ideal level is evaluation by someone who knows your history. The easier level is carrying the study questions into your next visit. The flaw is avoiding self-treatment. The dashboard can be incomplete. The answer is not guesswork. This protocol is more fragile than its name sounds. The most common failure is turning a map into a verdict. A waist change becomes proof of cortisol. A stable BMI becomes proof that nothing changed. A calmer week becomes proof that visceral fat fell. Each leap feels tidy because it closes uncertainty. Each one outruns the evidence. The named concept to keep is measurement mismatch. It means the outcome you watched was not the outcome the claim required. The minimum effective correction is one extra sentence. Say what the measurement can show and what it cannot. Not perfect certainty, but not the shortcut you were using. Now return to the two people with identical scale readings. One has a changing waist, the other does not. MAPS refuses to diagnose either person. It maps more than mass, audits the time window, practices only what randomized evidence supports, and seeks clinical context before treatment. That is enough to prevent the four biggest errors. It protects location from being confused with total weight. It protects association from being confused with cause. It protects a trial duration from becoming a promise. It protects a biological mechanism from becoming a home treatment. Precision gives you agency without pretending to give certainty. This is the title moment. Cortisol can push fat toward the visceral compartment, but it does not decide where every pound goes. That difference explains why your waist and BMI can tell different stories, why a blood snapshot may miss local tissue handling, and why meditation can change an abdominal measure without changing BMI. Exposure sets part of the pressure. Tissue changes how the signal is handled. Distribution determines the room. Measurement decides what you notice. The dashboard counts the load, while the body chooses the storage room. The opening promise was 4 conditions behind a common near miss. You now have all 4. The needle was honest. It simply never showed the rooms. So pull it all together, and the picture gets simple. Watch patterns, not isolated scares. Separate total mass from storage location. Read human trials by the result they actually measured. Keep Cushing's disease separate from ordinary stress. Use maps to organize the conversation. Map more than mass. Audit the time window. Practice only what the evidence supports. Seek context before treatment. Approximate tracking can still be useful, but approximate claims create confusion. The goal is not to fear cortisol. The goal is to stop asking one number to explain an entire system. Do not just take my word for it. The papers behind every claim are waiting in the description. Everything here is to help you understand your body, not to replace your doctor. Big changes are worth a conversation first. Never stop medication because of a video. If a treatment or test has you concerned, it is worth asking your doctor. Next time, I am opening up sleep and the waist, and why the same hours in bed may not describe the same recovery. If this gave you a clearer map, send it to someone who has been blaming themselves for a stubborn number. Before you go, leave one word below: MAPS. That public note is a reminder to measure the claim before believing the promise. I read these comments because the questions this community asks shape what I research next. You are not a failed equation. You are a person whose body cannot be compressed into one dial. The next episode will keep the same standard. We will separate the reading from the state, keep every claim tied to its evidence, and leave the shortcuts outside. Until then, keep the scale in its proper job. It measures weight. It does not draw the floor plan.